Welcome everyone to the Illusion of Consensus podcast. I'm here with my good friend Dr. Matt Johnson, who's a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins. Matt and I have done several podcasts before on psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. For those that don't know, Matt was part of the early renaissance of psychedelics in the early 2000s at Johns Hopkins, doing all the incredible research with psilocybin for mystical experience, depression, smoking addiction, and end-of-life distress. So Matt is famously known for a lot of that work, which is very compelling. And Matt, you've been on the podcast before talking about several psychedelic-related topics, one being the FDA's rejection of Lykos Therapeutics' MDMA therapy application. And so today we're excited to have you on and go over this new news, which is that the FDA is now committed to releasing the response letters to drug applications in real time in a push towards radical transparency. And at the same time, they're releasing over 200 response letters to previous decisions that they made in an effort to bolster transparency. Dr. Marty Makary, who has been on this podcast before, the commissioner at the FDA, he has said that this is a milestone day for the agency. By embracing radical transparency, one of the guiding principles of this administration, we're giving invaluable insights to help speed therapies and cures to market, providing complete context to investors and shareholders, and above all, restoring public trust. So we're going to go over this letter that was released in response to the application by Lykos Therapeutics for MDMA therapy. And the letter outlines several concerns that the FDA had that guided their rejection of the application. So I thought we'd bring Matt on to discuss. Matt, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think it's right about 1 year since this rejection happened, and so now we finally see some clear reasons for that. It probably would have been released had MAPS continued to be the sponsor and had they operated the way that MAPS, the nonprofit, traditionally had. They spun off and created Lykos, which, in part understandably, in acting as a drug sponsor, kind of acting more like a pharmaceutical company, which is their role, they didn't release that. They could have made this letter public, but they didn't. So now sponsors don't have a choice. The FDA is releasing this for the public, and as you said, retrospectively. So for this decision that was a year ago, they released it today, and that's good because there's dozens of others, drug sponsors in the psychedelic area that want to know exactly how to thread this needle, how to get their drug approved, and the public wants to know. And there's all kinds of issues that were brought up in the public advisory hearing, and we don't know which ones. Well, now we do, but there were speculations about which were the heavy hitters in terms of actually informing FDA's rejection of the application.
Yeah, and we spoke about this last year after the advisory committee, which you watched, several hours long. We talked about it while I was on vacation. We did a podcast on it, and then after the rejection, right around this time, we did a podcast. You, me, and Kim Witzak, who's on the advisory committee, she was there as well. That was a really good conversation that we did last year. So let's go through some of the important parts of this letter.
Yeah, do you want me to sort of walk us through it?
Here, I'll share the screen. Yeah, so the letter outlines several concerns, and so the first one is the um, the lack of collection of positive or favorable events?
Yeah, so this is, and there were only 3 categories of approval related concerns, and so that was the first of the 3. Now at the end of the letter there's several other concerns, and this is similar to all kinds of FDA feedback I've gotten over the years just for individual studies. They'll say, well, these are the real problems that are blocking our approval of allowing you to do this study. Here's some other kind of suggestions or things we'd like to know but aren't, but they're pretty clear in terms of these were rejection reasons, and these other things are a collection of other, recommendations or things that could have helped. But so just 3 rejection reasons, and one was the lack of positive adverse events. Basically, this is abuse liability. They wanted stuff like, measures of euphoria, positive drug effect, how high are you, rating scale for, how good is the drug making you feel. This type of stuff I've done in countless, a bunch of dozens of studies over the years, abuse liability studies. And that to me, my kind of beef with that is that we've got tons of science showing that MDMA has abuse liability. This is not an unknown. The NIH has spent hundreds of millions of dollars studying the adverse effects of MDMA, including its abuse liability. And we have real world evidence. I mean, people like getting high on MDMA. Millions of people use MDMA because they like what it does for them. It has, scientifically speaking, abuse liability. Basically mean people use it for the enjoyment. And while it's not always going to be enjoyable in a therapeutic context, there's at least going to be signs under most cases where it is enjoyable. There will be times even in a therapeutic scenario, many times where it is euphoric. And so, I mean, my kind of thought on this with abuse liability is if they're really concerned about abuse liability related to the therapeutic use of MDMA, the really relevant question is not whether MDMA has abuse liability. We know that. It very well does. You can get high and enjoy the effects of MDMA. The question is, to me, the most relevant question in that domain is, have you introduced MDMA to people? Have you increased their non-study use of it, particularly amongst people that have never used it before? So now if someone says at the 12-month follow-up that they've used it 5 more times on their own, that's a relevant, safety signal the FDA, should consider. Not whether like ratings of high or good effect or, these types of traditional abuse liability ratings. So I think that this is just, I was going to say it's like I'm surprised, but I'm not really. But I should be surprised that the FDA would use this as a reason. Again, because we know MDMA, people get high on MDMA, and the relevant thing you do with that is you just have an appropriate REMS program, which stands for risk evaluation mitigation strategies. It's the rules that they can apply when they approve a drug, saying you can't just use it under any circumstance. Here are the rules surrounding its therapeutic use. And so you can have aspects of diversion control, aspects that say, hey, you can't send people home with it. It has to be done in the clinic under supervision, things like that. Use of a centralized pharmacy. So not every like Rite Aid or Walgreens in the country is going to have MDMA on stock. It's, the tight controls that's in the diversion control category. So all that can be incorporated, and everyone anticipates, including the sponsor Lycos, that is going to be the case. And they had a proposed REMS that they submitted with the application, which very likely included, all of those various, aspects. So, we know that, hundreds of drugs with abuse liability have been approved therapeutically. Opioids, stimulants, cocaine and amphetamine like stimulants. Cocaine and amphetamine themselves are approved medications. You know,
What's
THC, you know, you name it. There's
what's cocaine approved for?
benzodiazepines. What's that?
What's cocaine approved for?
As a topical anesthetic for throat and nasal surgeries.
Okay. But
so not for its central use, but yeah. But amphetamine is clearly approved for its central use. In other words, for its, you know, drug effects, for its drug effects on the brain. You know, Adderall is amphetamine,
right?
As an example, which is essentially a very, you know, cocaine-like drug. They're very similar when you compare them in the lab.
Gotcha.
So yeah. Okay. So that's the first reason, which I just, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think that was a good reason. I think that's a good reason to have a tight control program. And like everyone realizes if this were approved, it would have those types of rules associated with it, because clearly millions of people like to use MDMA. And some listeners might get, you know, upset about my, you know, saying it's abuse liability. That just, you know, you can like it or not. That's the FDA language. That essentially means people like to use it recreationally. Use, abuse, whatever. I'm just using the language that the FDA uses. That's what they mean by abuse liability.
Gotcha. Okay. Moving on to the next concern, which is that it says you have not demonstrated that the effect observed with MDMA is durable beyond the 18-week end of study assessments. PTSD is a chronic condition, and any drug indicated for the treatment of PTSD is expected to provide a durable effect. The MP long. Do you know what that stands for? MP long.
That was their follow up, their study protocol that looked at long-term outcomes.
Okay, yeah, they said MP long,
which I believe was a tack on to the, you know, earlier study.
Yeah, and they said there was
it's called a separate protocol because it's kind of done under a separate IRB protocol.
Yeah. It said there was marked variability in the timing of those visits, with a wide range of 6 months up to 2 years of follow-up. Overall, the data contained in your application fails to establish how MDMA should be used to treat this chronic disease, whether treatment with a single treatment cycle is adequate or if retreatment is necessary.
And so an important backdrop to that is that there are two medications approved in the United States for PTSD treatment. They're SSRIs, brand name Zoloft and Paxil.
Yeah.
You have to give them every day. And so in terms of like the, you know, durability of a treatment response for a chronic condition, like, as they call it, PTSD, I mean, the two approved drugs, like, you've got to take them every day. And the studies that garnered their approval only looked at outcomes up to 12 weeks, falling short of the 18 weeks that they're mentioning. So, you know, here we have the drug cycle they refer to here is 3 treatments spaced out over several weeks with MDMA, you know, with evidence before the crossover that with evidence of efficacy up to 18 weeks. You know, it's legitimate to say we don't know about, you know, can treatment providers, you know, what if symptoms persist? They need to retreat. What's, you know, can they do that safely? What's the timing of that? Those are all legitimate questions. My answer to that in the context of, you know, a mental health crisis and plenty of need for PTSD is, if it was that alone, hey, approve the drug cycle as it was used in these studies, like a single course of 3 treatments with no retreatment. And then say, if you want retreatment, please collect the data to justify that. So they could run additional studies, post-approval studies that could broaden access for potential retreatment. And those studies could look at the durability and the timing. But at least we have data that PTSD can be, and I would say my reading of the data is substantially improved for a period of up to 18 weeks, which is longer than what the SSRIs were approved for by the FDA, with data only going up to 12 weeks. So why not approve it for what they study? Why not approve a single course? And that opens the door, that allows more safety data to be generated in the real world, and that could potentially be expanded had the sponsor gone back then and at the FDA's request and gotten done a specific durability retest, retreatment study. So I wouldn't have seen, and all of this is they have the authority to do any of this. They could say, well, we're approving it, but only under these limited conditions. They could have done that,
Right.
Even if you say like let's say it doesn't work at all past 18 weeks, which I doubt. Some people, because I've talked to them and, they're describing improvements years later, but let's say worst case scenario, all the effects come back, in 18 weeks for everybody. That's still 18 weeks without, and even if you can't treat them again, that's still 18 weeks without treatment. You apply that to a population, and a bunch of people would have committed suicide during that period of time. So, there's still value in, and again, I think I'm overstating. That's the kind of worst case scenario. So, I just don't see why that by itself would be a reason for rejection. That would be more of a reason for limited use with restrictions surrounding it until more data are generated.
Right. Yeah. And for SSRIs, roughly 20 to 30% of individuals with PTSD achieve full remission after the 8 to 12 week treatment, and 50 to 60% show a partial response. Just pulled up some of the data here. Whereas it appears with the MDMA treatments that the effects are much more holistic and sort of identifying root cause, helping people process trauma, rather than SSRIs appear to be more of a Band-Aid solution.
Yeah, I believe a higher percentage. I don't know the exact numbers off my head, but I believe it was a majority in remission. So, a higher percentage than those studies you mentioned, which is part of why it got breakthrough designation. And the idea is that it does work through, it clearly has to work through different mechanisms. In part because it is this, like 3 doses, with these lasting effects, which I think clearly it's because it's, to me, psychotherapeutic process. People are making psychological insights and therapeutic gains during the drug treatment that persist in the same way that a course of psychotherapy can persist. And of course, psychotherapy is a backdrop to this treatment, to what they're doing, which, so it all certainly makes sense that people learn things about themselves or changing their daily habits in a feed-forward manner.
Yeah. Yeah, so meta-analyses suggest that SSRIs produce a small to moderate reduction in PTSD symptoms compared to placebo. So is your impression that MDMA therapy is likely more effective than SSRIs, the current approved treatment for PTSD?
Likely, but I do think, we have to be somewhat guarded in our there is a lot of hype surrounding this field and a lot of enthusiasm, and it is a trend that's been published about in clinical treatments where effect size tends to decrease over time. They tend to have the largest effects, just new treatments in general, when they're kind of new and exciting, and for probably a number of reasons. The early adopters, the scientists are kind of most excited about it, and there can be some bias there, and there certainly is bias in the field. I can say, as someone who's done this research for many years. But then, other things like those people are probably, in some ways, are probably conducting the treatment in a much more thoughtful, caring way. These are all speculations. No one really knows, but there's a number of reasons to explain why effect size would tend to decrease. But even if it ended up showing a similar effect size to SSRIs. And I think it will hold. I think future research, my bet is that it would hold out to be a larger effect size, because when it works, it does seem that it's working because people are resolving psychological material, which has a sticking power, not just pharmacologically masking symptoms, which the SSRIs do, which is, fine. I'm all for all of these tools being in the toolbox. Not anything is not going to work for everybody. But I do think it's going to hold up to be larger. But even if there was a reduction of the effect size, even if it was similar to those of SSRIs, that still means it's approvable.
Yeah.
Just because, aspirin is over the counter for headaches doesn't mean ibuprofen and naproxen and acetaminophen can't be available as well. There's going to be individual differences. One thing might work for one person, but not another. And we do know this certainly works in a very different way than the SSRI. So having another treatment option available is, if it's generally safe and effective under the appropriate conditions, it's approvable.
Right. Yeah, but is your sense right now from the current data that MDMA therapy is more effective than SSRIs, generally speaking?
Yeah. But I think we should be open to, that may shift. And I would say we're seeing that trend. I say that because of the data, in part because of the data in psilocybin for depression, where the effect sizes are tending to look smaller. Still very approvable. But again, for some of the reasons I listed, some stemming from the hype in the field. I think we're kind of like, the recent data suggesting probably a more realistic signal, something that can really help a substantial number of people, but it's it's not going to help everybody, and some people are helped to a moderate degree, so it might turn out like that. But I think right now I would bet that based on the data now, and my best guess going forward is it is going to be for many people a better treatment option than SSRIs, because it does have that ability to get to psychological resolution.
Yeah.
Rather than just masking symptoms.
Exactly. Yeah, that totally makes sense, and that's how I think about it too. But you're saying we're seeing now smaller effect sizes with psilocybin for depression, and it's because the studies are being done in a more rigorous fashion, or what's going on there?
In part, and we don't really know. I mean, that's kind of the one thing we probably do know. I mean, so for example, I was involved with the study. I wasn't a fan of doing it this way, but we used a waitlist control for depression, which is really a poor way to control. Some evidence in the addiction field suggests you actually get less improvement in the control group than you would had they not even shown up for the study. So it's kind of like a gimme, a waitlist control where you randomize people to either get the treatment now or to wait several months to get the treatment. I mean, they know they're not getting the real treatment, but even like compared to, say, doing a kind of a treatment as normal or, an alternative treatment comparison, which I'm a big fan of, comparative efficacy design. You're told them to do nothing. And so people they join a study when they're ready to get better. And so there's the sense that they probably did worse than they would have done had they done nothing at all, because they sign up for a study and they said, you're going to get this treatment, but wait for 6 months to get the treatment. Or I think in our case, it was 3 months, but so you have things. That wasn't the only thing, but there's also the earliest data were from cancer, which is probably different than major depressive disorder. So and just there's little things that happen that I think overly enthusiastic investigators can kind of massage the data in ways that they may not feel are wrong, but are massaging the data. So all of that goes on. And so I think the more recent data that we've seen, for example, Compass, which looks completely approvable, but yeah, more modest in effect compared to some of the earlier effect sizes in the field.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you were part of some of those studies early on, right? As you
Yeah, and I could see. I mean, you're probably going to get a more realistic answer where drug companies are involved, who kind of do things very rigorously, used to the FDA pathway, and in the psychedelic area, you get this. It's something I've tried to talk about and to dissuade, but this kind of like religious fervor about like, we're going to save humanity with this treatment. And it's almost like if you publish any data that might look negative, or even if the participants give you a response that looks negative, they're letting everyone down. Like, we're literally in a mission to save the human species. So that's an overall framing that can express itself in millions of ways that you're unaware of. And that's why you got to be careful about sending those messages. And you get that a lot in the psychedelic field. And so.
Yeah. Totally. Let's move on to the next part of the letter.
Yeah.
So next we had that it says, although the MAPP1 and MAPP2 protocols, and what does that mean again?
Those were just the names of the two phase 3 studies.
Okay. Although those protocols allowed for enrollment of participants with prior experience taking MDMA, approximately 40% of the enrolled participants reported prior use of MDMA.
Yeah. So there's so it's really a two-part. They go on to say that it's so they're saying that's higher than what you would expect in the population.
Yeah.
But then they're also saying that they had a high rate of pre-screening failure, and they say both of those factors, one, the high percentage of people who have used MDMA in their life, and high rates of pre-screening failure, both contribute to selection bias, which may have led to functional unblinding. So there's two main factors there. One, and this, I don't know why this didn't get more attention when it was brought up during the public advisory hearing, but the treatment response, the percentage of people that got better, the percent improvement in amongst people who had used MDMA in their life versus those who hadn't, was identical. Like, they were like right there. They looked identical. So there's absolutely no evidence that previous use of MDMA had led to inflated therapeutic responses. And we should also remind people that those people who had used MDMA, it wasn't like they used them therapeutically. Right. They used it like at a rave. 99% of people, if they used MDMA, most of the time they've done it for fun or exploration. They took it at a party, at a rave, back when they were in college, whatever. But Lykos literally had the data showing the treatment response was identical. So to me, that like takes all of the wind out of that sail. That couldn't be, and the rates weren't that different. So they had 40% who had used MDMA before, but as the FDA said, it was like, depending on how you count it, whether it's severe, moderate, or severe, but 16 to 20% of people with moderate or severe mental health issues, I believe, as mental illness, have used MDMA in their lifetime. Okay, so we're talking about 40% versus 20%. It's still like, in a treatment population, you're going to get, a good number of people who have never used MDMA, and that was still a majority in those two studies. It was 60%, and you're going to get a minority who had used MDMA. I mean, and ultimately, so that percentage wasn't, identical. It wasn't 20%. It was, 16 or 20% was 40%. But nonetheless, you mirrored the population in the broad sense, in that, yeah, the majority hadn't used MDMA and a minority had. And you'd like to actually see that works in both, because a good chunk of the population out there has used MDMA, like it or not.
Right.
So
right.
they found that it worked in both, and they found that the degree to which people were helped was nearly identical in both of those groups. Now, then you move on. So I don't think that was an issue. And then you move on to the
Screening.
other issue. Yeah, pre-screening. And so I don't really understand this. I wish they had written more about it. But, pre-screening, this is like, you ask people things like, well, how many times have you used MDMA in your life? Well, I went through that period in college where we used it about every other weekend for a few years. So then they do the math and they say, I think I've used it 200 times in my life. And so then that's like, they're excluded for that reason. So that's one of many things. Like, you have, even before they come in for the medical screening, oh, I had a heart attack last year. Okay, they're excluded at pre-screening. Oh, I don't know what their age restriction was here, but I'm 17 years old, and I'm actually sure 17-year-old wouldn't be allowed. I forget what their minimum age was, but they would have excluded that person. Or I don't know if there was an upper age limit, but if there was, the person might have said, I'm 90 years old, and they might have been excluded. But you get my point. There's dozens of things that you don't need to waste everyone's time and bring them into the lab. You ask them on the phone, and if the answer isn't in the range that's allowed, you say, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. And everyone goes. And so they're saying that the rate of that was so high that it could have caused a selection bias. So that doesn't make any sense to me, because you want a high rate in a sense for a safe trial. Like, you're not pretending that the study is modeling it is representative of all people with PTSD out there. What you want the study to be representative of is the people who would be willing and medically qualified for doing MDMA treatment for their PTSD. And so it shouldn't be representative of, like, it's going to be highly restrictive, just like the treatment itself is going to be pretty restrictive. So the answer to that is making sure, again, that the REMS, the safety rules, mirror the safety screening that they have, that they used in the study. And in certain ways, like, for example, say if you had excluded people that you had used MDMA 200 or 300 times, that would actually improve function, or make functional unblinding less of a concern, because you're actually, in that particular case, removing people that are extremely familiar with the effects of MDMA. So I didn't agree with that. With that rationale either.
Yeah. And they go on to say, for durability, the most informative design would be a randomized double-blind study, which includes the initial treatment sessions followed by a blinded long-term follow-up with pre-specified criteria for retreatment if needed.
Yeah, and I think that's a good idea, again, to inform the durability retreatment question. But again, they didn't need to reject it. They could have said, okay, you've shown us data for durability up to 18 weeks with this course of 3 administrations. We're allowing that until you show us more evidence. It's limited to that. And then Lykos could have conducted such a study. So I don't really disagree that would be, you need more data to inform repeat use and the durability of the effect, these important questions that are going to come up, because, it's not going to work in everyone. Is it okay to try it again on that person after a while, or maybe it works for a while and then it stops working? At what point is it safe and effective to try it again on that person? The type of study they're suggesting would be important for informing that. But they could have approved it under this restricted frame without that. Because there's people out there suffering, and it doesn't mean we need to bend all the rules, but we do have more confident. We do have we don't need to know about the durability beyond 18 weeks to at least approve what their study did.
Yeah.
You could do that in people seeking treatment.
Yeah. Like, again, with the precedent of SSRIs, which you mentioned, which is 8 to 12 weeks.
Right. The other thing is to draw a parallel. Those studies went out to 12 weeks. Guess what? People have been on them for 8 years.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing for depression. None of those studies have gone out years, but that's the way they're routinely used in practice. So they could have easily made a rule with the MDMA to say, okay, you're limited to those 3 treatments until you give us more data. And that would have at least gotten the ball rolling. That at least could have gotten it to market and helping some people.
Yeah.
You know, and especially in the context of already it is not just it's routine to use SSRIs long past the time period for which they looked at durability data and those studies.
Right. Yeah. I routinely hear of people who've been on SSRIs for 10, 15 years even.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're getting on to 30, 40 years for some people. I mean, some people have been on Prozac since the 80s.
Yeah. And just on that point briefly, do you have any thoughts on that of long-term efficacy, safety?
Well, we have no, I mean, we have a growing evidence. There's definitely withdrawal syndromes on a number of symptoms. And we also just don't have any evidence that it's working at that point. Are you just pulling yourself out of withdrawal at that point? Yeah, you feel better. It may be when you're on it versus when you go off, but that may just be because you're going through a withdrawal period when you try to go off. We don't know that it's actually helping people once they've been on it, because it's very, very common for people to have to increase the dose and to add additional medications after they've been on for months or for years. And so we just don't have any evidence that it's actually a net benefit. A lot of medicine is going to be the art rather than the science. So I'm not saying we need evidence for everything. So I'm not arguing it shouldn't be allowed. I'm just saying we should recognize that, a lot of what's happening might not be helping at all. It's definitely far beyond what the science has looked at.
Right. Yeah. And if someone's really depressed 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, I think that should prompt a deeper investigation into biological factors, exercise, nutrition, sunlight, and psychological factors like trauma,
right,
nervous system dysregulation, things like breath work, meditation, psychotherapy, psychedelic.
And really, it's not just after that amount of time. It should have been before they were on the SSRI to begin with at all. At least those first few you mentioned, are you sleeping? What's your relationship like? Do you hate your job? Maybe finding another job would be the kind of the first step. Maybe, whatever. You're in an abusive relationship. You're in these bad habits. Where, how much are you drinking? You're drinking a 6-pack every night and you're sleeping 5 hours of crappy sleep. It's okay, how about we stop drinking and get some good sleep and get some exercise in, and then we'll see how you feel after a couple of months. Just these basic. I mean, it sounds like common sense, but it's just never done. It's almost never done. Yeah. In terms of actual general practitioners, what they're going to ask, they're just going to write the script for an SSRI. In part, not because of them, because of the way they were trained, and also the insurance structure. They don't have time for this long conversation about your lifestyle factors and about, are you satisfied with your life and how much sleep are you getting?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So social connection. Are you laughing? Are you dancing? Are you moving? Are you going out? Sunlight. What's your relationship with your kids and your wife and your dad? And yeah.
Join a club. Try to get a girlfriend. Stop whatever.
Yeah,
whatever. Just
stop watching porn and OnlyFans.
Stop watching porn. Stop drinking all the time. Stop whatever. Overeating. All of these things that you would hope would be the first kind of kind of check in, to kind of get
Yeah.
yourself like more calibrated.
Yeah, and would you agree, like, this is part of, like, this is symptomatic of a deeper problem in our society, the way we look at medicine and health, and people like Casey and Callie Means have talked about this, about how medicine is hyper kind of in these separate silos, and so you go to psychiatry department, you can talk to your psychiatrist,
Yeah,
and they'll just give you the SSRI. They won't talk to you about nutrition, sunlight, or trauma, things in your unconscious or subconscious
right. Like your
mind.
brain is kind of separate from the rest of your body. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, you've got a crappy diet and you're not sleeping, you're not getting exercise, and in 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 horrible relationships, or probably more common, like you're just you have no relationships, you're isolated, and like you're divorced from, you spend your life working in some basement and you don't get outside in the morning. Just
yeah. Yeah, like, yeah,
yeah.
I mean, not to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but, like, I was very depressed in, like, 2020, right after graduating high school, and I was mostly just staying inside. I lost some connection with some friends. Some friends moved away for college, so I was very much by myself all day, just watching podcasts, not getting a lot of sunlight, and just lacking social connection, and other things too, and so that prompted a deeper investigation into psychedelic therapy, particularly with MDMA, because there were some reasons why some of those friendships and relationships disintegrated, and just kind of learning what my role in that was, and how I had found myself in those situations where social disconnection was such a powerful dark
Right.
force in my life, because that can be hard too sometimes. Like, how do you make friends, and like what's led me to this point of lacking social connection? Sometimes it's
Right.
not as easy as just going out somewhere and just making friends. It's sometimes there's deeper psychological factors that have led oneself
Yeah, and I've
to.
definitely seen that in the various therapeutic studies with psychedelics, where people just make, you know, they kind of, they're either new insights or just things like they've told themselves before, but they haven't taken seriously. Like, oh, they realize they haven't invested in their relationships with whoever, their spouse or their kids, and like, and then they just like, I need to do that, and then if they actually do that, and often they do, then like it's good, like they have a better relationship, they feel better, they have higher quality of life.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's
Yeah.
uh, move on. So they highlighted a few things about demonstrating durability of effect, continuing to follow participants in a blinded manner after the acute treatment, and minimizing potential bias. And we went over some of this already, but they're saying excluding or minimizing the number of people who've done MDMA, but lots of people in society have already done
Yeah,
it.
obviously they're going to have to do a trial with, I mean, if I was them, I'd take nobody. But the flip side is, it's like, okay, like it's going to be harder to run that trial. And it, like, whatever. I already gave my spiel on it. Like, the treatment response was the same. They already have evidence. It doesn't matter, you know,
Yeah,
but that's what they want. That's what they want.
yeah,
Like, in terms of if they allow any, like, what number is okay? I guess 16%, given the numbers that they found. But even anything's going to be relatively arbitrary. I
yeah,
mean, that was about mental illness, not PTSD specifically. So, like, do we even know that number specifically for PTSD? I mean, again, the majority hadn't used, some had. The results were the same. To me,
yeah,
that seemed pretty clear.
yeah. And then they're saying to capture all abuse-related adverse events, regardless of perceived emotional valence.
Yeah, to things like, do you feel high? Good effect, that type of stuff. So again, gave my take on that.
Yeah, yeah. They're also saying
So
consider the inclusion of low dose MDMA arm as a control.
yeah, I mean, thankfully this is in the consider part, not the requirement.
Yeah,
So like, there's a whole rabbit hole to go down with that. Pluses and
yeah,
minuses of doing that. Nothing's gonna like fully address the unblinding issue.
yeah. Did you want to go over any of these additional comments? Incorporate routine lab
I've
tests.
actually got to run
Okay.
now. But yeah, there's a lot, but we went over the three categories of the reasons for the rejection. So, yeah, there's a bunch of these other like kind of minor comments, like some of it would be like, okay, if you have like an extra like $5 million, like have a factorial design, like without the therapy, just out of the curiosity. I mean, that's not needed. The sponsor isn't going to do that because they just don't have an extra $5 million coming out of their ears and whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, sorry, it's the way of the world. Like, that would be interesting, good science. I'd love NIH to fund some research like that, but if you don't need that for drug approval, like, you're not going to do it.
Yeah. The only other thing
Yeah.
worth briefly highlighting is just characterizing the extent to which psychotherapy in the treatment contributes to the treatment benefit, and using a more evidence-based standard of psychotherapy. We've talked about this in previous podcasts.
Yeah, like I would say that would be a good idea. Like, yeah, that's a whole
Yeah.
other conversation, but yeah, that would be good to see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm glad we went over some of these concerns. In general, I think you and I are agreeing that the FDA should have accepted this and should have had certain standards to meet after the study. Like, because you can approve something and still ask for more studies, right?
In a
Post-marketing
limited
studies.
fashion. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So we're and the
Cool.
SSRIs comparison, I think, is really strong and really important to remind people.
Cool.
And I'm hoping with this new FDA, with Marty McCary, who's been on the podcast before under RFK Jr. and Jay at NIH and all these things, but particularly at the FDA, with a lot of people that I know that work there, I'm hoping this new administration can make some changes and actually make some progress with psychedelic therapy, because a lot of people could be benefiting from these treatments, and
Absolutely.
PTSD, depression, end of life distress, and a whole host of other things too that we're still investigating, like OCD and eating disorders, etc., chronic pain.
Yeah.
So I guess
Absolutely.
you just want to finish off by just kind of just saying your anticipation for this new administration, and if you think any progress will be made on this.
I welcome the focus on, psychedelics. It's just gonna, that's gonna have to be met with just, principled decisions, and the goal shouldn't be just to get psychedelics approved, but to improve things in the system that can allow psychedelics or any other, treatment to be subject to a fair process, like this transparency, I think, which wasn't just for psychedelics, it's like for anything. Like, yeah, now we're going to make the rejection letters public, which I think is a good policy for the public. So I welcome that.
Yeah, and with people
more like that would be good. Yep.
Yeah, and with people like Cowley, Casey Means, Jay Bhattacharya, RFK Jr., Marty McCary, Tracy Beth Hogue, a lot of people that I know. I think there's a lot of promise for approving and regulating psychedelics in a safe and sophisticated manner.
Agreed. I'm going to have to run.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, man. Thanks.
All right.